The call came in at 3:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I'd been lying awake anyway, the way I do most nights since my wife, Carol, passed. The bedroom gets too quiet after midnight. I'd been staring at the ceiling fan, listening to it click on every rotation, something I keep meaning to fix, when my phone lit up on the nightstand. It was my daughter, Lily. She never calls that late. Not once in her 31 years has she ever called me past 10 o'clock. She always said, "Dad, if it's not bleeding or on fire, it can wait until morning." That was her mother's rule, and she inherited it along with Carol's stubbornness and Carol's laugh. So when I saw her name on that screen at 3:47 in the morning, my stomach dropped before I even answered. "Lily?" My voice came out rough from disuse. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" There was breathing on the other end. Shallow, like she was trying not to make noise. "Dad." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Dad, I need you to come get me." I was already sitting up. "Where are you?" "I'm at Marcus's parents' house." "In Beaumont." A pause. "Dad, I can't talk loud. Please just come." "Beaumont, Texas, 93 miles from my house in Spring, in the dead of night on a Tuesday." "I'm on my way," I said. "Lily, are you safe right now? Are you hurt?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Just come, Dad. Please come." She hung up. I sat there for maybe 4 seconds holding the phone. 4 seconds of just processing. Then I got up, pulled on my jeans, grabbed my keys off the hook by the back door, and walked to my truck. I didn't even bother with coffee. I just drove. I should back up, because you need to understand the full picture before you can understand what I was driving into that night. My name is Howard Briggs. I'm 64 years old. I spent 32 years working in petrochemical plant safety, inspections, compliance, emergency protocols. I've walked into facilities where one wrong step meant an explosion. I've learned, over a long career, that panic is the most expensive thing in the world. It costs you time. It costs you clarity. It costs you the ability to make the right decision when everything is falling apart. Carol used to say I had ice water in my veins. I always told her it wasn't ice water. It was experience. Lily is my only child. She was born when Carol and I had almost given up on the idea of having kids. We'd been married 8 years, had 2 miscarriages, and had started quietly adjusting our expectations for the life we'd build together. Then, on a cold January morning in 1993, Lily came into the world screaming at the top of her lungs, and Carol grabbed my hand and said, "Well, she's got your temper," which wasn't true. I don't have a temper. But I understood what she meant. Lily grew up kind and smart, and a little too trusting of people. She always saw the best in everyone. Carol and I talked about it sometimes, how we hoped the world would be good enough to deserve that quality in her, rather than punish her for it. The world, as it turns out, did not make us proud on that front. She met Marcus Whitfield in 2018, when she was working as a registered nurse at St. Luke's in Houston. He came in with a broken collarbone from a recreational soccer game, and, according to Lily, he made her laugh 3 times before they even got him into a room. She told me about him on a Sunday phone call, the way she told me most things. Casually, like she was describing the weather. And I remember thinking that the casual tone meant she was more interested than she wanted to let on. Marcus was pleasant enough when I met him. 35, worked in commercial real estate development, drove a clean truck, looked me in the eye when he shook my hand. He was polite in the way people are polite when they're performing politeness, but I gave him the benefit of the doubt. First impressions under scrutiny are hard on everyone. His parents were a different matter. I met Reginald and Lorraine Whitfield at the engagement dinner Marcus arranged at a restaurant in River Oaks. Reginald had built a mid-sized construction company over 40 years and made enough money to be the kind of man who expects to be listened to in every room he enters. Lorraine ran the family the way some people run a corporation, organized, strategic, and convinced that her way was not just the best way but the only way. I sat across from them for 3 hours that evening and tried to find common ground. We found a little. Reginald and I both liked college football. We both believed a handshake still meant something. But there were moments, small moments, that stayed with me. The way Lorraine redirected every conversation back to what the Whitfield family had accomplished. The way she talked about our family traditions with an emphasis that suggested Lily would be joining something with expectations attached. The way she smiled at me with warmth in her face and something cooler just behind her eyes. I drove home that night and thought, give it time. People are complicated. Don't borrow trouble. Lily and Mark left in the spring of 2021. Small ceremony, outdoors, wildflowers, the way Carol would have loved. I walked Lily down the aisle and I held it together until she squeezed my hand at the altar and whispered, I wish Mom was here. Then I had to look up at the sky for a good long moment. The first year of their marriage seemed fine. Lily still called me every Sunday. She talked about work, about the house they'd bought in Pearland, about a dog they were thinking about getting. She sounded like herself. Happy, a little tired sometimes, the way nurses always are. But herself. It was sometime in the second year that the Sunday calls started getting shorter. At first I told myself she was busy. She and Marcus had started talking about starting a family. She'd picked up extra shifts, normal life getting fuller, the way it does. But there was something in the calls that changed, a kind of careful editing, the way someone talks when they're choosing words more deliberately than usual. She'd start to say something and then redirect. Laugh a little too quickly. Change the subject. I asked her once directly, Lily, is everything okay? Of course, Dad. Why? You just seem, I don't know, a little far away. A pause. I'm fine, I'm just tired. The night shifts are getting to me. I let it go. I shouldn't have, but I let it go. By early 2024, the Sunday calls had become every other week. Then, once a month, I told myself she was an adult with a busy life, and I didn't want to be the kind of father who crowded his daughter. Carol would have known what to do. Carol would have found a reason to show up with a casserole and stayed until she figured out what was wrong. I am not as instinctively clever about people as Carol was. I rely on what people tell me, and Lily had felting me things. Looking back, I can count the signs I missed. I count them often. So when the phone rang that Tuesday night in March and I heard that whisper in my daughter's voice, something that had been sitting uneasy in my chest for 2 years, finally had a name. I pushed my truck to 75 the whole way to Beaumont. The Whitfield family home was in a neighborhood called Calder Place. Older money, large oaks, brick houses set back from the street. I'd only been there twice, times for holiday dinners that Lorraine organized with the same energy she probably brought to military operations. I found the house without trouble. Every light on the lower floor was blazing at 5 in the morning. I parked at the curb, walked up to the front door, and rang the bell. It took a full 2 minutes before the door opened. Lorraine stood there in a silk robe, hair perfect in the way that suggested she hadn't been asleep either. Behind her, farther in the hallway, I could see Marcus standing with his arms crossed. Howard. Lorraine's voice was pleasant and absolutely impenetrable. This is quite a surprise. I'm here for Lily, I said. She called me. Lorraine's expression didn't change, which was itself an answer. Lily is resting. She hasn't been well. We've been taking care of her here. I'd like to see her. She's asleep, Howard. It's 5 in the morning. I looked past her at Marcus. He didn't move. Didn't say anything. Just stood there with his arms crossed. Marcus, I said, where is my daughter? He shifted his weight. She's upstairs. She's been having some anxiety issues. We thought it was better for her to be here where... I'd like to see her, I said again. Lorraine stepped slightly to one side, just enough to block the door with her body without appearing to block it. It was a practiced movement. Howard, I understand you're concerned, but I can assure you Lily is fine. She gets these episodes sometimes. She called you impulsively. You know how she gets when she's anxious. When did she get here? A small pause. Thursday. Thursday. That was 5 days ago, and she hasn't called me in 5 days. She's been resting. I looked at that woman in her silk robe, with her careful, pleasant face, and I made a decision right there on that front porch. I was not leaving without my daughter. Lorraine, I said, keeping my voice entirely even, either you let me in to see Lily right now, or I'm going to call 911 and tell them my daughter phoned me asking for help and is now being prevented from leaving. You can explain the situation to them. I already had my phone in my hand. Something shifted behind her eyes. Just a flicker. Then she stepped back and opened the door. Marcus started talking as soon as I walked in. Nobody is preventing anything. We're just, where is she? Upstairs. Second door on the right. I didn't wait. I went up the stairs, found the door, knocked twice and opened it. The room was a guest bedroom. neatly kept, lamplight, cream-colored curtains. Lily was sitting on the edge of the bed. She was still dressed, like she hadn't slept. She had her arms wrapped around herself. When she looked up and saw me, her face crumpled. I crossed the room, and she stood up, and I held her, and she cried into my shoulder like she was 12 years old again and had fallen off her bicycle. I didn't say anything. I just stood there and let her cry. After a while she pulled back and looked at me with swollen eyes and said, "I didn't know if you'd come, Lily." I held her face in my hands. "I'll always come. You know that, I know." She was crying and almost smiling at the same time. "I know, Dad." I checked her over the way a father does, looking for anything wrong, any physical sign. She wasn't injured. She was pale, and she looked exhausted in a way that went beyond tired, the kind of exhaustion that comes from emotional weight. I noticed a prescription bottle on the nightstand. I noticed she didn't seem quite herself in the way she moved and spoke, a slight slowness, a flatness in her eyes. "Are you taking that?" I nodded toward the prescription bottle. She looked at it. Marcus said it was for anxiety. His mom found a doctor. "When did you start taking it?" "A few weeks ago." "Okay." I picked up the bottle and read the label. I didn't know the medication. I photographed it with my phone. "Get your things, sweetheart. We're going." "Dad," Mr. says. "Lily, get your things." She looked at me for a moment. Then she got up and started putting things in an overnight bag. When we came downstairs, Lorraine and Marcus were waiting in the foyer. There was another man with them now. I learned later it was Reginald's brother, Edmund, who lived nearby. The three of them formed a loose wall between us and the front door. Lorraine spoke first. "Howard, I really think you're overreacting to a—" "We're leaving," I said. "If anyone physically prevents my daughter from walking out that door, the next call I make will be to law enforcement. I will not ask twice." Marcus looked at Lily. "Baby, you don't have to go. You've been sick. You need—" "Marcus." Lily's voice was quiet but clear. "I called my dad. That was all," she said. And somehow it was everything. We walked out the door. I didn't rush. I didn't run. I walked Lily to my truck, put her overnight bag in the back seat, made sure she was buckled in. Then I drove away from Calder Place at a calm and legal speed, watching the rear-view mirror. I didn't speak until we were on the highway and the city lights were behind us. "Tell me everything," I said. She told me. It took most of the drive home. The medication was the first thing. Marcus had framed it as her idea, told her she'd been too emotional and hard to be around, convinced her she needed help managing her anxiety. The doctor was a friend of Lorraine's who hadn't asked many questions. The prescription was for something that, I would later learn from Lily's own physician, was not appropriate for what she'd been told she had. It had been making her foggy, compliant, less like herself. That was not the worst thing. The worst thing was the account. Lily had inherited money from Carol's mother, my mother-in-law, Eunice, when Eunice passed in 2020. Just over $400,000 in a joint investment account. When Lily and Marcus married, he'd suggested, reasonably he said, that they consolidate their finances. She'd trusted him. She'd added him to the account. Over the course of 2022 and 2023, that account had been drawn down to just under $60,000. She'd noticed it in January. She'd asked Marcus about it. He told her they'd had expenses. Investments he'd made that hadn't paid out, some business obligations he was handling. He told her not to worry about it. He told her she was too anxious to understand the full financial picture. When she'd pressed him, had gotten angry. First, just sharp words. Then, in December, he'd grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise. That was when she'd started pulling back from me. She'd been ashamed and she hadn't wanted me to know. In late February, she'd asked to go stay with her friend in Austin. Marcus had suggested they go to his parents' house instead. "Just for a little while. Mom's been asking about you." Lorraine was warm and solicitous on the first day. By the second day, Lily's phone was missing. By the third day, she understood that she was not a guest. She'd found her phone in a kitchen drawer on day 4. She'd waited until the house was quiet on day 5. Then she'd called me. I drove for a few miles in silence after she finished. "You're not going back," I said. "I know. And Marcus is going to hear from my attorney." She was quiet for a moment. "Dad, I don't want, Lily." I kept my eyes on the road. "I'm not asking. I'm telling you what's going to happen. You can be as involved or uninvolved in the process as you choose, but he is going to answer for what he did to that account, and he is going to answer for what he did to your arm. That is not negotiable." She didn't argue. I think part of her was relieved to have someone else carry it for a while. I got her home, set her up in her old room, and sat at the kitchen table until the sun came up. I wrote down everything she'd told me. Every date, every amount, every detail. I've worked in a field that requires meticulous documentation. I know how to build a record. The next morning I called my attorney, a man named Grayson Polk, who I'd used for estate matters and trusted completely. I walked him through what Lily had told me. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment and then said, "Howard, if what you're describing about that account is accurate, your son-in-law has a serious problem." "He does," I agreed. "And the prescription situation. Has Lily seen her own doctor? First appointment is Monday." "Good. Document everything. Get the records." I had already started. What followed was not dramatic. It didn't look like a movie. There were no confrontations, no explosive phone calls, no showdowns in parking lots. What there was paperwork. Grayson filed for a protective order based on December incident with Lily's arm, which Lily had photographed at the time. She'd had enough presence of mind to do that much. The order came through in 9 days. Meanwhile, Lily's doctor reviewed the prescription and discontinued it immediately. Within 3 weeks, she was noticeably more herself. The flatness left her eyes. She started cooking again, which she'd always loved. She called me from the kitchen one afternoon just to talk, the way she used to, and I had to put my hand over the phone for a second to get myself together. The financial picture took longer, but Grayson was thorough. What Marcus had done with the account was a matter of documented record, wire transfers, withdrawals, timestamps. Some of it went into business accounts that later investigators identified as commingled with personal expenses. The civil case was filed in May. Marcus's attorney sent 3 different letters suggesting settlement before the discovery process was even complete. Reginald Whitfield called me once during all of this. Once. He identified himself formally, said he wanted to speak man-to-man, said that families ought to handle their problems privately. I told him, very calmly, that I agreed families should handle their problems, and that's exactly what I was doing. He didn't call again. Lorraine, I heard through Lily, told people in their social circle that Lily had suffered a breakdown, and Howard Briggs had interfered with the recovery process. I was past caring what Lorraine Whitfield told people in her social circle. The divorce was finalized in December of that year. Lily got a judgment for the recovery of the misappropriated funds, not everything, because some of it was spent in ways that would take years to fully unwind, but enough to matter. Enough to know that what Mark had done to her had not gone unmarked by the law. On the day the divorce was finalized, Lily drove to my house. She showed up at the door with a grocery bag and said she was cooking dinner. I asked her what the occasion was. She said, "No occasion. I just want to cook dinner for my dad." So she cooked, and I sat at the kitchen counter and watched her the way I used to watch Carol cook, that particular contentment of being in the same room with someone you love while they do something ordinary. We ate at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd sat up until sunrise on that Tuesday in March, writing everything down. After dinner, she looked at me over her coffee cup and said, "Dad, why didn't you panic when I called you? When you came in and Lorraine was blocking the door, how did you stay so calm?" I thought about that for a moment. "Because panicking wouldn't have helped you," I said. "And you needed help, not panic." She considered that. "I think I'm going to try to be more like you." "Don't," I said. "You're better at the people part than I am. Your mother's way was better than mine for most things. Just keep the steady part." She smiled at that, Carol's smile, coming out of Lily's face. "People ask me sometimes whether I'm angry, whether I hate Marcus, whether I hate Lorraine. I tell them the truth. I don't have time for hate. Hate is something you carry, and I'm 64 years old, and I've already carried enough. Grief and worry, and those 2 years of watching my daughter disappear and not knowing how to reach her. I'm not picking up anything else. What I have is my daughter back. She got a job at a hospital in the Heights area of Houston and found a little house to rent. A starter house with a porch and a yard where she's been talking about maybe finally getting that dog. She calls me every Sunday again. Sometimes twice. I don't mind the twice. I still lie awake some nights. listening to that ceiling fan click. But now, when I stare at the ceiling, I'm mostly thinking about the weekend, and whether Lily is coming for dinner, and whether I have everything I need to make the brisket the way Carol used to make it. It's enough. More than enough.